Pause for a moment and look at the bigger picture, not just the headlines that change from hour to hour. When Dubai's name starts appearing in the middle of a conversation about a regional crisis, the world's reaction changes immediately. Dubai is not normally perceived as a front line. For the global public, Dubai means flights, hotels, business, transit, stability, and the feeling that things keep working even when the surrounding region is going through tensions. That is exactly why, when tension in the Middle East comes to be felt, or even just perceived, through Dubai, the signal being sent is much stronger than in a place where the world already expects instability. It is no longer just a news story about clashes and political statements, but a news story about the fact that the shockwave has passed beyond the first circle. That is what makes Dubai so important in this story. Not because it would automatically be the center of the conflict, but because it is one of the clearest indicators that the effects of a crisis have begun to reach the networks that keep the region connected to the rest of the world. In reality, major modern crises are not measured only by what happens on the direct line of confrontation. They are also measured by the moment when the nodes of mobility, trade, perception, and trust begin to be affected. Dubai sits exactly at the intersection of these nodes. It is at the same time a city, a global brand, an aviation hub, a logistics point, and a symbol of a very well-packaged normality. When such a place enters the vocabulary of crisis, the world instinctively feels that something has shifted. It may not yet know all the details, it may not yet understand all the nuances, but it understands one simple thing. If even Dubai is being pulled into the story, then regional pressure has reached a phase that can no longer be ignored. This is also where the difference between fact and perception appears, and it matters enormously. Sometimes what changes public behavior is not only the exact scale of an incident, but the place where that incident is seen, discussed, and interpreted. And Dubai is one of the strongest amplifiers of perception in the region, because in the mind of the global public, Dubai is associated with the idea of continuity. Things move forward, flights depart, hotels operate, trade flows, the city does not stop. The moment that image begins to crack, even partially, a psychological effect appears that goes far beyond the borders of the Emirates. People begin to ask not only what happened there, but what it means for the region, for international routes, for the economy, and for what may come next. That is why Dubai has become an alarm signal, not because it explains the crisis by itself, but because it shows the world that this crisis is already being felt in the very places where the world expected control, predictability, and functional normality. And this is exactly where our story begins. Not with a single explosion, not with a single communiqué, not with a single statement, but with a shift in perception. A place perceived as a symbol of stability begins to be spoken in the same sentence as regional tension, blockages, risk, and uncertainty. From that moment on, the crisis no longer belongs only to the direct actors. It becomes a crisis watched, calculated, and felt by everyone who depends on the functioning of the region. And that changes everything, because the moment the whole world begins making its own calculations, every signal, every reaction, and every hesitation gains much greater weight. To understand why Dubai became the alarm signal of the Middle East crisis, you need to look at the city not as a spectacular backdrop, but as a mechanism. Dubai is important not only because of its image, but because it is one of the region's great intersections. International aviation, trade, transit, investment, tourism, and the logistical flows that connect entire continents meet here. That means that when signals of risk appear around Dubai, it is not only the public that reacts, but entire systems. And systems react differently from people. People react through emotion, rumor, fear, or denial. Systems react through decisions. They suspend, reroute, postpone, reassess, reduce exposure, change routes, and shift costs. And it is precisely this type of reaction that turns Dubai into a geopolitical barometer. Because a hub that lives on predictability does not enter defensive mode without reason. Here you can see very clearly why Dubai is more than a location on the map. It is a point where regional tension becomes visible through the behavior of infrastructure. Diplomacy can preserve ambiguity. Statements can be formulated in ways that leave room for interpretation. But infrastructure sends a much more direct message. If precautionary measures, interruptions, blockages, or adjustments appear, it means perceived risk has risen enough that the actors who depend on stability have moved into protection mode. And the moment that happens in a hub like Dubai, the effect spreads instantly. For passengers, that means changed plans, affected flights, uncertainty, and informational congestion. For companies, it means costs, delays, and new calculations. For markets and investors, it means the signal that a regional crisis is beginning to produce real effects on functioning. This is also where the symbolic dimension of infrastructure appears. A conflict can remain, for many people, a distant reality as long as modern life continues without visible interruptions. But the moment routes, hubs, and mechanisms of connectivity are affected, the conflict becomes concrete even for people who do not follow geopolitics day by day. Suddenly the crisis is no longer a map, it becomes an experience. It becomes something felt in schedules, in costs, in mobility, and in the sense of safety. And Dubai has exactly this power of translation. The translation of regional tension into a language everyone understands. Flights, rhythm, trade, functioning, normality. That is why when Dubai appears as a sensitive point in a crisis, the world reads events differently. It no longer looks only at the exchange of messages between states. It also looks at the consequences. And the consequences are what transform a political crisis into a crisis with global impact. In this sense, Dubai has become an alarm signal not only because it is exposed to the region's shocks, but because it makes their propagation visible. It is the threshold at which tension stops being perceived as someone else's dispute and begins to be perceived as a problem that can touch any network connected to the Gulf. When such a node begins to shake, the world no longer watches only what happened. The world begins preparing for what may come next. There is also a less visible but extremely powerful dimension through which Dubai became the alarm signal of this crisis. It is the psychological dimension, the one that rapidly transforms regional tension into a global state of alert. The public does not process events only through raw facts. They process them through images, contrasts, and symbols. And Dubai is one of the strongest symbols of control in the global imagination. Emblematic buildings, impeccable infrastructure, rhythm, order, efficiency, light, money, continuous flow. Even those who have never been there intuitively understand what it represents. That is exactly why, when Dubai begins to be associated with chaos, tension, and uncertainty, the perceived impact rises sharply. This is where the contrast appears that ignites the global reaction. If a serious event takes place in an area the public already perceives as unstable, the reaction may be intense, but predictable. If an event or a series of risk signals touches the image of a place associated with functional normality, the reaction becomes stronger, faster, and more emotional. Dubai amplifies this effect through the simple fact that, for many people, it is the opposite of chaos. From this contrast, extreme narratives are also born. In the first hours of a crisis, people try to fill information gaps as quickly as possible. Some fall into panic and turn every image into confirmation that everything is getting out of control. Others move into denial and reduce every signal to media exaggeration. Both reactions have the same root, the need to simplify a complex reality. But major crises do not allow themselves to be simplified so easily. They move across multiple planes at the same time: military, diplomatic, economic, logistical, and psychological. And Dubai, precisely through its status as a global symbol, becomes one of the places where these planes meet most visibly. Here you can clearly see how perception becomes part of the event. It no longer comes afterward, as commentary. It comes at the same time and produces effects. A viral image, an aggressive headline, a rushed interpretation, and within a few minutes, millions of people change their state, expectations, and behavior. When this happens around a name like Dubai, the effect multiplies, because it does not activate only curiosity about a regional crisis. It also activates fear related to stability, routes, the economy, travel, safety, and the direction the region is heading. In such a context, even rumors gain disproportionate power if they are not quickly tempered by clear information. That is why Dubai is also a test of perception. It shows how quickly the world can move from "we are observing what is happening" to "we are preparing for consequences." And this jump is essential, because the moment the global public, companies, and markets enter anticipation mode, the crisis stops being local in its effects alone. It becomes regional through propagation and global through perception. That is exactly the type of alarm Dubai transmits in such moments. It does not only show where the shockwave has reached, but also how quickly it can change the state of the world. For this reason, any serious discussion of the Middle East crisis that ignores Dubai's role misses one of the most important keys to understanding. Dubai is not only a place where the effects are visible, it is a place where the speed at which effects become a global narrative is visible. To fully understand why Dubai became the alarm signal of the Middle East crisis, you need to place it within the larger geopolitical chain. In isolation, Dubai looks like just a city feeling the effects of regional tension. Placed in context, it becomes the indicator of a crisis propagating from the military and political core toward the circles of the region's functioning. And this changes how the entire situation is read. At the center of the chain remains the tension between Israel and Iran, with all its layers of direct and indirect confrontation, signals, reprisals, and deterrence calculations. That is where the core producing pressure lies. But pressure never remains in the core. It looks for exits and produces effects around it. And the next circle is formed by the hubs and networks that keep the region connected, functional, and relevant to the world. This is where the Gulf comes in, and within this circle, Dubai has a distinct role. Dubai translates in real time how much of the political and military tension has begun to be absorbed by the region's infrastructure. When Dubai becomes sensitive, the signal is that the crisis can no longer be contained within a logic of local confrontation. It has begun to press on the system that makes the region function economically and logistically, and the moment this happens, international actors change their calculations. This is also where the American factor enters, hovering over the entire equation. The United States is not merely an external observer in such a crisis. It is an actor of alliance, pressure, strategic signaling, and political rhythm. And when American politics moves, the perception of all the other actors moves as well. In such moments, the name of an American leader becomes more than a name. It becomes a factor that can accelerate or temper the chain through tone, positioning, decisions, and the ability to rapidly shift the center of gravity of the discussion. This is one of the explanations for why the public automatically links Washington to what is happening in Israel, Iran, and then in hubs like Dubai. Not because all events have a single cause, but because the rhythm and direction of the crisis are influenced by signals coming from major actors. And modern geopolitics is, to a large extent, a struggle over rhythm. A slow crisis leaves space for negotiation, recalibration, and controlled exits. A crisis accelerated by harsh rhetoric, emotional reactions, and inflamed global perception can push actors toward decisions made under pressure. It is exactly at this point that Dubai becomes relevant not only as a place, but as an indicator of speed. When signals of instability reach Dubai, the world understands that the rhythm has changed. The crisis is no longer only about who attacks and who responds, but about who can still control the secondary effects. And the secondary effects are what transform regional tension into an international crisis. Roots, costs, risk perception, economic behavior, public anxiety, and political pressure. That is why Dubai's role in this picture is so important. It does not provide the final verdict of the crisis, but it shows that a sensitive threshold has been reached, a threshold where the next decisions may lead either toward de-escalation or toward an expansion of pressure. That is the alarm signal it transmits. Not that everything has already broken, but that the regional system is tense enough for cracks to begin appearing in places that, until yesterday, seemed protected from chaos. At this point, the important question is no longer only why Dubai became the alarm signal. The question becomes what exactly this signal shows about the stage the crisis is in and what is worth watching next. Major crises do not have a single form and do not move in a straight line. They advance in waves with moments of shock, periods of confusion, attempts at recalibration, and then new reactions. That is why the correct reading of such a moment does not come from a single image or a single headline. It comes from the way the behavior of major actors and of the systems that depend on stability changes, and here Dubai remains an excellent indicator, because in a place built on rhythm, connectivity, and functioning, the smallest signs of pressure are noticed immediately and have global resonance. When the world watches Dubai during a regional crisis, it is actually watching something larger. It is watching whether tension remains limited to the core of the confrontation or whether it begins to erode trust in the mechanisms that keep the region and the global economy connected. This is the key. Dubai is not only the mirror of a specific event, it is the mirror of the state of the network. And when the network shows signs of stress, the alarm signal no longer belongs only to the region, but becomes relevant to everyone who depends on it. That explains why the global reaction is so intense every time Dubai enters the equation. People do not see only a city, they see a psychological and functional threshold. They see the place where geopolitics meets everyday life. They see the point at which a seemingly distant crisis begins to translate into routes, costs, plans, and concrete decisions. And from that moment on, attention changes. It is no longer only curiosity, it becomes anticipation. And this shift from curiosity to anticipation is perhaps the clearest sign that a crisis has entered a new phase. That is exactly what Dubai says when it becomes an alarm signal. It says that the world is no longer only watching what happened. The world begins to ask what may break next, what may still be saved, and who still has room to maneuver in order to stop the spread of pressure. At the same time, this signal must not be confused with an inevitable verdict. The fact that Dubai has become an indicator of tension does not automatically mean that the worst-case scenario is next. It means the margin of error has narrowed. It means every message, every reaction, and every decision by relevant actors may weigh more than in an ordinary period. This is where the maturity of a real analysis becomes visible. It does not turn the signal into a prophecy, but it does not treat it as an unimportant detail either. It reads it correctly, as a threshold. And thresholds are exactly the places where history changes its rhythm. Dubai became the alarm signal of the Middle East crisis because it stands at the intersection between conflict and functioning, between perception and infrastructure, between symbol and system. When tension comes to be seen through Dubai, the crisis stops being only about fronts and statements. It becomes about networks, about trust, and about the way the world begins to reposition itself in the face of risk. And that is the moment when a regional crisis gains global weight. That is why Dubai's name carries so much weight in this story. Not because it alone tells the whole truth, but because it shows, more clearly than many other places, how far the shockwave has reached and how quickly the sense of normality can change in a region under pressure.